The United States has lost its classification as a liberal democracy. The assessment was published this week by the VDEM, Varieties of Democracy Institute, widely regarded as the most credible watchdog of democracy. According to the VDEM, the speed at which American democracy is currently being dismantled is unprecedented in modern history. Within just 1 year, the country's liberal democracy index dropped by approximately 24%, and its global ranking dropped from 20th place to 51st. The VDEM describes this as the largest one-year decline in American democracy on record, dating all the way back to 1789. So if it's not a liberal democracy anymore, then what is it? According to the VDEM, the US is now considered an electoral democracy. Now my spidey senses are giving me two possible ways in which you might react to this. The first response might be, an electoral democracy, that's still a democracy. The second would be, I'm not sure we should still call that an electoral democracy. And you know exactly which camp I'm in. Both reactions are understandable, and they both depend on how we look at what's being measured. So let's talk about them one by one. The VDEM distinguishes between 4 different regime types: liberal democracies, electoral democracies, electoral autocracies, and closed autocracies. Each of these systems describes how power is structured and constrained. Essentially, a liberal democracy, according to the VDEM, combines elections with strong institutional limits on power. Civil liberties, independent courts, effective oversight, and so on. An electoral democracy still holds competitive elections, but these constraints are weaker or less consistent. So according to the VDEM, the US still meets the minimum criteria for a democracy, but no longer the full standard for a liberal one. The VDEM tracks this using an index called the LDI, the Liberal Democracy Index. The LDI doesn't measure whether or not elections exist, so it's not a binary outcome. It measures whether power is constrained across institutions. So it doesn't measure who wins power, but what power is allowed to do once it's won. Now, according to the report, the level of democracy in the US has fallen back to the levels of 1965, which many consider the beginning of modern democracy in the US. This time marks the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and sustained collective action and struggle led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr. So the United States has returned to the level of 1965, but without returning to the historical conditions that produced this very important moment. And the speed of change is also unusual. You can see this in this graph here. They're comparing the decline to places like Russia, Hungary, Turkey, and India. And they're noting that the speed of democratic decline in the US is unusually rapid. We note that power has become more concentrated in the executive, that oversight by Congress and the judiciary has weakened, that civil liberties and academic freedom and freedom of expression show measurable erosion. In fact, freedom of expression in the United States is now at its lowest level since World War II. Here you see a graph of the LDI from 1955 to 2025. You see the regional average for North America and Europe. Here is a relatively stable pattern over decades, followed by 2 sharp periods of decline. Those are marked in red. The horizontal line brings you back to 1965. So this is probably what you want to send to your conservative friends. Now, some of you might say, an electoral democracy, we're well past that point. America is not even that anymore. This holds water because data sets like the VDEM do not capture change in real time. So this data is not like breaking news and more like astronomy, if you will. Our analysis of the data is lagging in time. When we observe distant stars, the light that reaches us has left those stars years ago, and some of them may have already disappeared entirely. What appears stable to us now might no longer reflect actual conditions. And democracy indices work in a similar way. They do not register the moment change begins, only the point at which it actually becomes measurable. So I think this is what gives this moment and this classification a lot of weight. It's no longer a warning. It is an official assessment and a measurement of a system that has shifted across multiple institutional dimensions, a trajectory that has reached scale and speed that is historically unusual, and a country that once served as a reference point has now left that position. By the time a measurement really shows up, a system has already been functioning differently for quite some time. And once that change becomes visible, the question no longer is what's actually happening. The question then becomes where that trajectory is headed and how far the needle is going to move.